guest today is the incredibly talented musician and producer who has been in a long list of bands over the last 30 years or so. He has toured and or recorded with Motorgoat, Heatmiser, Quasi, Jon Spencer and the Hitmakers, J.D. Pinkus from the Butthole Surfers, and the late Elliott Smith. In addition to playing many instruments and writing songs, he has also scored several films by Portland filmmaker Vanessa Renwick. He has been an integral part of the Portland music scene, and I'm so grateful I got to spend some time with him. Here is my friend, Sam Coomes. First of all, I wanted to ask you about La Luna and the whole scene there in the early 90s, mid-90s, because I have two friends who were bouncers at La Luna and have heard tons of stories from them, and it's super fascinating to me how it seems like, I mean, that in as well as the entire scene, but it seemed like that club had a lot to do with really kind of propelling a bunch of different people. Those two guys that were bouncers, they ended up becoming, one guy became guitar tech for Art Alexakis in Everclear. The other guy did some touring with Tenacious D. Like their entire crew like got involved with the Foo Fighters. Like all these guys kind of came up in through that spot. And so I've been doing research on La Luna and learning about it. And it seems like it was such a cool situation where you could have all these bands. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I read that it was $1 a person on Monday nights. Is that right?
That's true. I don't know if they did that throughout the existence of the club, but for a while, there were these dollar nights that, they were important for the scene, which was much smaller in those days. And for the local bands, it was all local bands, and it was $1, and the place would sell out quite frequently for local bands that nobody knew about outside of town, and maybe even people in town didn't know that much about.
And so what was the draw? Why did it become so popular if they were just local bands?
Well, they were good local bands. The booking agent was, used discrimination. And people realized that was a very cheap way to go have a good time and maybe see some local band. And there was I forgot to turn my phone off.
Oh, no worries.
This is going to be a problem if later on, if I don't do it now. Let's rewind a little bit, because I first moved to Portland in 1989, and I was I didn't know anybody in Portland except for these guys in a band called the Dharma Bums, which I lived in San Francisco, and my band played a show with them, and I think it was in Davis, California, and we were both just like little bands. I remember playing this show in Davis, and I don't know, a couple dozen people were there, and I was talking to the guys, and I'm kind of getting sick of San Francisco. I think I need a change. And they're, come to Portland. I didn't really think about it, but a little bit later, I just kind of cruised up to check it out, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're playing this place, the Pine Street Theater. Come on down." And okay. I go to the Pine Street Theater, which is in the space that La Luna eventually became. Mm-hmm. And the Dharma Bums, I think, had sold it out, and they were, and people were going nuts, like they were the Beatles, Like, I thought, wow, because it's one of the problems I had living in San Francisco is it seemed like people didn't really care about local bands at all. You could play for years, put out albums, and your best hope would be opening up for some other touring band. Like people would come in and go see touring bands, but local bands were not taken seriously. But here, in those days, Portland was still a little bit of a backwater, and there was like a local pride. Like we're not fancy like California and like Seattle is becoming. We got to like take care of ourselves. So there was a scene already there was a store downtown called Locals Only that sold only local bands, a whole store.
Vinyl and CDs and stuff?
Vinyl, CDs, tapes, not CDs. Yeah, I guess CDs. That was like, we're talking about late 80s, early 90s when CDs were less popular than LPs and tapes. So that was the main thing they had there. And, you could just record your band a little tape in your basement, take it to this store, Locals Only, and they would sell it and people would buy it.
That's cool.
So that's the context. Pine Street Theater changed owners or whatever happened and they became La Luna. And Portland did have a vibrant local scene. People cared about the local bands, and instead of poo-pooing the yokels, they really wanted to support bands that were from here.
Well, yeah, and this was post grunge, right?
No, this was maybe, I guess post the beginning of grunge, but it was like right in the middle of grunge, really.
Yeah, and it was kind of an interesting situation, wasn't it?
Before Nirvana got signed and everything like that. It was still really, and Portland wasn't so much grunge like Seattle. There were maybe a few bands like that, but it was a more varied scene. Yeah,
well, it's just interesting to me because when Nirvana broke, then it's like everybody was trying to find the next Nirvana. And it doesn't seem like popular culture was bands, for a very long time. And it doesn't seem so much that way anymore. But in the early 90s, coming off all the 80s butt rock and fucking Guns N' Roses and everything, then you get into grunge and everything that started to happen. It permeated pop culture. It was a part of everything. And it doesn't seem that way anymore so much. It's more about like hip hop and R&B and various other types of music. And it's so cool to me to look back on that time period and try to understand what that felt like. And you were a part of that. Maybe not grunge as the term, but you were a part of everything else that was happening, right?
Sure. That's just the grunge was kind of the last gasp of the linear cultural. Rock and roll had for a long time been a big driver of the culture, and it informed the culture in an important way. And the culture kind of, they called it, you had mainstream culture, and because it was sort of linear, it would move in a particular direction and evolve. But the internet took that all away, and it's just dissipated. There isn't any kind of a linear, digital stuff is all non-linear.
Yeah, well, and the advent of the internet and YouTube made it possible for anybody to record and release something, but it's all just, there's too much. And back then, through the 40s, 50s, all the way up until probably like 98, 99, 2000, there was a certain channel you had to go through to get discovered or to get people to figure out who you were, right? It's just different now because the internet.
Sure. Yeah. You couldn't. Yeah. There was, for a lot of people in my generation, it was it's been, and it continues to be a struggle in some ways because there was a model that we tried to master where, you would get in a band, you would write some songs, you would practice, you would get really good, you'd start playing local shows, you'd build up an audience, there was like this progression, and then people would start to notice you. Pretty soon you would be doing interviews like this, except it wasn't on, it would just be in the newspaper or the magazine. And then all that just went away. I was thinking about it kind of recently because my daughter was talking about a friend of hers that has been working as an intern, essentially as a promoter. I guess it's still called a promoter, but promoters don't actually promote anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They just organize. Bands have to promote themselves. In the old days, you would book a gig, and the promoter would hire somebody to make posters and put posters up, and would take ads out in the, that was kind of their job, to promote the show, to get people down there. That's really doesn't happen much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, but they're still called promoters. It's a vestige of the past.
Yeah.
But so there was a model that we all sort of, and it was a path that was kind of laid out that you could take. It wasn't necessarily an easy path. There was all sorts of pitfalls, but you could see it ahead of you and try and go in that direction. And now it's kind of like it's all over the place. You're just winging it.
Yeah, so I'm trying to put myself in that perspective, in that time frame. In order to promote yourself, you would just write songs, get gigs. People would show up. They would like you. They would tell your friends. They could go to Locals Only and get your vinyl or your cassette. And to me, it's just like a cooler way of spreading what you enjoy. Now you just send a fucking link. You're just like, boop.
I think it is, in my opinion, it's cooler. Also, and it cultivated a more passionate audience, because if you liked music, if you liked a specific band, say, your chance to interact with that band was either to go to a show or buy their record. That's it. They might get an article written about them in a zine or something like that, maybe, or maybe not. You couldn't just access them 24/7. You couldn't write a message and then get pissed off because, like, oh, they didn't write back on their social media.
Yeah.
Right. They're too good for me. It was just like, so you got excited when the band came to town. That was your one chance you're going to have to see them during the year. Maybe some bands toured twice, a fall and a spring tour. And so everybody who was into that band went down there and went bananas. And now, people are like, I'd rather just stay home. I can just watch them on YouTube. People already posted the set list. I know what songs they're going to play.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a more passionate fan base and a more passionate experience in those days, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the camaraderie you must have felt playing with all those people. I mean, it seems like it would have just been a community of people between the fans and the bands and the bands and the bands. Like it seemed like everybody just would have been a collective.
Well, that was the punk rock ethos, really. Yeah. Which, some of that is still around today. But again, it's with less intensity than in those days.
Mm-hmm. So in 91, is that kind of when you started playing? I mean, you said 89, 90 in Portland.
Yeah, I can't remember. It would have been the first band probably started around 90, 91.
Okay. And you could feel that playing at these clubs in Portland. You could tell something was happening, yeah?
Well, like I said, in contrast to my experience when I lived in San Francisco, it seemed like my band was never going to get anywhere. But here, it did seem like you could build an audience and people would take you more seriously just as a local band. So, it didn't seem, in retrospect, you look back on it and you think, oh, that's special. But at that time, it just seemed normal.
Just seemed normal. And were you making enough weekly where you didn't have to have a day job, or you're still working all the time?
No.
Yeah.
No, I mean, even now, well, I've been very lucky that I haven't had to take full on, time clock punching jobs for many years, but I don't make enough income strictly from touring, and there's always little side hustles.
Yeah, it's tough when your art is the thing that you live for, and you're trying to pay bills with it.
Well, I can't complain. There were a number of years where I did nothing but tour and record, and was, I thought I had it made in the shade.
Yeah.
They went away.
Yeah.
The internet again took that all away because, streaming, you don't really make any money at all. The CDs, I know people don't like CDs anymore, which in some ways is great because I just bought this, like a Stax 9 CD box set in like mint condition for $40. It's got like over 200 songs on it, and nobody likes CDs, so the people are just trying to get rid of them. But CDs for artists were they were great, really, as a financial model, because every CD, depending on the nature of your deal and how much you spent recording it and so forth, but you could make as much as $5, but you were probably making like $2, $3, $4 per CD, straight to the band.
Yeah. Do you want to explain that to anybody listening? What it's like when you cut some sort of record deal? Did you get advances to finance the recording?
Well, in the CD era, that was common because you could pretty much count on recouping the investment. If your band had an audience and a following. If you didn't and you were starting out, you would self-finance, of course. So you would get an advance, typically. Well, here's the punk rock model that we tried to work with and managed to work with most of our records. Label gives you X amount of money. You deliver a record. They take X from all the sales until that's recouped, and then 50-50 split of everything after that.
Afterwards.
So, so say all in manufacturing and everything cost $10,000. CDs cost, in those days, say they cost $12, $13. But, so if you sell 1,000, you're recouped, right? And then, we used to sell, between 5,000 and 10,000.
Mm-hmm.
So you're making all this money. It was kind of nice. That just went away. And tech was like, hey, nice. You guys like music? We'll take that.
Yeah.
And now it's gone. They pay pennies on the dollar now.
Yeah, and there are different contracts that have been signed by different people throughout the years. I know the Beatles infamously got fucked because Brian Epstein signed something with, I believe they were called Northern Songs, and people didn't understand publishing rights back then, and so the Beatles barely made any money, and they didn't own their actual recordings for a very long time. And then another great case is the Backstreet Boys, who I forget what their manager's name was, but I believe he managed the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, and those guys were fucking selling insane amounts of records, and they were getting checks for like 10, 20 grand or whatever.
Yeah. Well, of course, those are very different situations because NSYNC and Backstreet Boys were just performers. They didn't write the songs. They just were, they went out and performed, and people wanted to see that. That was a valuable thing. But the Beatles, I'm not sure that they didn't make a lot of money. I seem to remember seeing pictures of them, and mansions with Rolls Royces and stuff.
They did make money, but I believe it was from touring and other things. But their catalog, because the Beatles catalog went for sale in the 80s, and Paul McCartney was at the auction trying to buy back their music, and Michael Jackson and Sony ATV outbid him. And him and Michael Jackson were friends, and after that, he didn't like him anymore. Because Michael Jackson bought their fucking catalog and then sold it to Target. And, that's why I hear Beatles songs on Target commercials.
Well, yep.
So, I mean...
I don't have a lot of tears for Paul, but,
Yeah, I think he's doing all right.
Yeah, things kind of... But yeah, I could see why we'd be aggravated.
Yeah, it's a weird scenario when you are responsible for creating some form of art and then you don't get to own it or make money off of it. And because you signed a piece of paper with the wrong words in it, someone else is making all that money. It's kind of a weird situation.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was in a band, Heatmiser, and we were not a popular band by any means. I didn't write the songs for Heatmiser, so I'm only peripherally involved in this particular situation. But our final record, they did get a publishing deal, the writers, Neil Gust and Elliott Smith, and it's owned by Universal, I believe. And in the years since, the band's become more popular because of the popularity of Elliott. And so recently there was interest in reissuing this record. It's been out of print for many years, and people want to hear it. And Universal basically blocks that because they're egregious terms as who they own the publishing. And
wouldn't they want to make money off of it?
You would think so, but they want to make all the money off it.
Oh, because you and Neil stand to make money?
I don't really. I think maybe I would get some minor royalty as a performer. Uh-huh. Neil would stand to make some money from publishing, except Universal controls it and they won't allow it except, if they make all the money, basically. Mm-hmm. I mean, and they're not, they're not musicians, they're not fans, they're strictly money people.
Yeah.
Like like the record, they're only in it for the money. Mm-hmm. So they're not going to take less money. And so the record is either permanently or indefinitely on hold from being reissued strictly because of, bean counters.
And in the meantime, it'll stream on Spotify and Apple Music. But what you were saying is the royalties, it's like fractions of a penny per listen, right?
Well, they group listens together, and so you get 0.03 cents per 1,000 streams or something like that. I don't remember. They used to send paper statements that were really long, and you would think, they documented all the different categories of airplay for every single song. The basic, in a nutshell, it's structured. They don't put all your music together and say all your music's been streamed umpteen thousand times, and therefore you get all this money. They make every single song a separate issue, and there's a stepped progression of payouts. So if you only get a few streams, you get basically nothing. If you get millions, you get
$5.
You get some. I think you probably get more than $5. I want to know, but it's not much. It's not anything even compared to like airplay on conventional radio stations that used to get royalties from that were a lot. That they were not unless you had a huge hit, you weren't getting rich off of that either. But like college radio stations, you would still get income from that. A lot more income than you get from streaming.
Yeah, I've heard stories about Dave Grohl getting checks for Smells Like Teen Spirit in the mail, because it's still on conventional radio all the time.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
The conventional airplay is pays a lot better if you have a hit that gets played on radio.
Huh. So do you ever get checks from Spotify or Apple Music or streaming people?
It's collected by third-party agencies, and I do get them, but they're not substantial.
Huh. And that's all because the record labels or the publishing companies signed deals. They must have been horrible deals.
Well, it's confusing because originally, before these services were popular, they sold them to people on the pretext that now everybody anywhere will be able to hear your music. You'll have a huge audience. Isn't that awesome? Like, we don't pay you. We're doing a service for you, right? You give us your money. I mean, your songs, and which amounts to your money, but you give us your songs, and we'll make it available for anybody in the whole world to just at the click of a button on their computer.
Mm-hmm.
And that will be great because you'll have all these new fans that come to shows and they'll buy your albums and you'll make money that way. It's like advertising in a way. But that didn't end up happening. What happened is people did not come to shows and did not buy the records because they could simply stream for nothing or next to nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And that went on for years, and pretty soon people were like, "Oh, well, you took all our music, and you're now a multi-million-dollar company, and we get nothing." So lawsuits came, and they forced them to pay royalties, but they're not much.
Yeah,
and so it's more than zero, which was the original model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's still a bummer, though, because essentially the only way to make money producing music now is to tour or sell merch, right?
That's it. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. And if you can't get people to come to shows, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's rough, man. It's rough.
It's a bit of a hustle.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I'm lucky. I feel very lucky. So, I'm kvetching about the digital model of music distribution, which has impacted me and most people quite negatively, but I still am able to tour with my bands and the numbers line up and it's okay. I have an audience and I still, it's amazing. You get on a plane, fly the other side of the world, set up, they open the door and people come in and they want to see you. It's crazy. I almost can't even believe it sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I've performed a number of times, nowhere near as many as you, nowhere near as many as like a stand-up comedian or anybody who gets paid to be on stage in front of people. But the thing that I remember and the thing I hear everyone talk about is that you can't replicate that feeling of performing in front of people and having them look at you and know your songs and sing along with everything. Like that's an energy that you cannot recreate.
Well, I mean, I'm a fan too, as much of a fan or more of a fan than anybody else. I go see music all the time because it's like, to me, it's a magical experience when you're in the flow in a specific place and the music is happening right there. It's not, it just goes by. You can't, let's replay that song, so you're engaged, you're really engaged because it's just flowing through you. And live shows, of course, it's louder and there's like an energy there and it's a physical experience. It's just, that's still unmatched, I think. So luckily, at least, some people still feel that same way and come to shows.
Yeah. Yeah, I just finished reading the biography of Led Zeppelin by Bob Spitz. Have you read that?
No.
I'd heard stories about the debauchery and all the stuff that those guys did.
Oh, well, maybe, was that the one where they had they had sex with the shark in the hotel room or whatever?
There's all kinds of stuff that you're just
I read that one.
What?
That one's called Hammer of the Gods, right? That was an older one. I don't know if there's a newer one.
The Bob Spitz one just came out sometime in the last year.
Okay.
But I had never read any of the other ones that I just heard stories and stuff. And, you know, I play drums and have thought John Bonham was the greatest thing ever, just like a majority of drummers think. And reading through that book, it's pretty wild how reckless and out of control he was. I mean, the way that they paint him in that book is he was just drunk all the time. And they were doing blow. He started doing heroin in the last 5-6 years. But the thing that is so powerful about them and any sort of musician who plays together in a group is that when they came together, those 4 people, regardless of how fucked up they were, they created something that they couldn't even explain. And you get people that are of a like mind that understand something, like you play together and there's this other thing that happens.
Yeah.
That you can't really explain to somebody who's never done it before.
Right. And that's kind of rock and roll at its best is like that. It's not, it's what differentiates it from pop music and a lot of different other musics where it's a writer writes a song and people play the parts and a producer produces it and you have a song. Like with a rock band, each person has to contribute their own energy and character to the music and it makes it into this weird sort of alchemy that it's not it transcends, you know, it's like the cliche of being the sum being great, or the total being greater than a sum of the parts.
Yeah, so going back to 91, 92, 93, La Luna, Pine Street. Who were you hanging out with? Who were you playing instruments with? What bands were you starting? What was going on?
Well, originally I had a band with Janet Weiss called Motor Goat. We were a trio with Brad Pedenoff, who later changed his name to Brad Mossman, playing on bass. And so we were kind of a little, I don't know, like a psychedelic power trio or something. And we played for a few years, but that kind of imploded. And then Janet and I played as just morphed eventually into a duo called Quasi. So Quasi was active. The beginning of Quasi overlapped with those years, and my other band, Motor Goat, was also active during those years.
And you were doing a lot of playing in Portland at those other clubs?
Yeah, there was a lot. And of course, later, I as I mentioned, I joined Heatmiser, so I was active in several bands. But yeah, La Luna was the big club. It was maybe 1,600 people would be in there. But there was a lot of smaller ones like X-Ray Cafe and Satyricon were the 2 regulars that pretty much everybody played, and a lot of other clubs kind of came and went.
So what was it like playing in that scene, in that time?
Young people going nuts, and it was, in retrospect, you look back and you think, it was a lot of fun. There was a lot of stuff happening. It was a tumultuous time for me, much of that period. I can't say I had a lot of fun, but there was a lot of turmoil, and when you're in the middle of something, it looks a lot different from when you're looking back on it years later.
Well, also when you're in your 20s, late 20s, it just feels like your brain's in a different spot. And I always wonder why so much of the most important music that's ever been created is usually by people in their 20s. There's so much stuff that happens, and it's like your brain hasn't fully developed, and you're fearless, and you're just coming up with wild stuff, but you're also not developed. And so you don't know how to have relationships with people, and you haven't figured any of that stuff out yet.
Yeah. I think you're onto something.
Yeah. So it's this weird mixture of endless possibility, but also like, I don't know what I'm doing, man.
Yeah. And a lot of it is kind of hit and miss. You don't know. Part of it is you're fearless because you don't understand how impossible it is.
Yeah.
you haven't seen that, like, that's just not possible. So you do it. You just take a flying leap. And I mean, it's a typical syndrome for bands to their first album is great, but or their first two albums are great, but after that, and I think a lot of it is that you start being more realistic, and that's kind of the kiss of death for a certain type of creativity.
Well, it's also difficult to continually write quote unquote hits. And that's what a majority of people want to hear are the hits. And if, I don't want to speak for everybody, but if like you're a true artist and you enjoy what you do, you don't want to just write the same thing over and over every album. You want to get crazy and experiment and do wild stuff that maybe doesn't appeal to everyone.
Yeah, that's true too. Of course, hits, it doesn't even have to be hits. It's just kind of like you make a record, you think it's great, you put it out and people like it. And then you do another one, you're like, I'm sick of that old stuff. You want to change it. They don't like it. It wasn't even a hit, like I think the scene that I came out of was, punk rock and the various types of music that evolved out of punk rock, and it wasn't hit driven really. It was more, I don't know what it was driven. It was just like scene driven. You had to sort of get through to people that were in this certain scene. You wouldn't necessarily get a hit on the radio, but you would get a buzz and people would talk about you.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but it's, as an artist, if you repeat yourself, people are like, it's kind of like the first record, but not as good. And if you don't do that, it's like, I like the first record better now. I don't understand all this stuff. But of course it should be hard, really. And it should be, people, I mean, again, as a fan, as somebody in the audience and who goes to see shows and listens to a lot of music, I'm very picky, and people should be. Why would you settle for second-rate music?
Yeah. You want to be wowed. You want to feel something, and I don't know, sometimes you can't always feel that. And you change, the artist changes, your circumstances change. Like, there's so many things that are moving constantly. There's like a perfect example for me. Do you know who the Mars Volta are?
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw them open, I want to say for A Perfect Circle. It was either them or Foo Fighters. I can't remember. But they opened for someone. They were nobody. I mean, they had been at the drive-in, but they were nobody. And I saw them perform with no idea who they were, and they completely blew my mind. And that was when I was like 19 or 20 or whatever. If I experienced that now at 38, it wouldn't have the same impact on me. When I saw them at that time period, I didn't have kids, I didn't have a job, like everything was different. And so there's all these factors that go into whatever your experience is when you see something.
Yeah, certainly. So yeah, the audience changes in that way too. But that's interesting to me now too. I play in a couple bands, and My band Quasi never really had a huge amount of success. We had enough success to keep the band going and make it interesting, which is great. But we're never, we're far from a household name, and we still play shows. And people from our old audience who are now similar age as us still come out. But like I'm noticing younger people, which is interesting. They just discovered it. Well, I don't know, probably on the internet, that I've complained about so much, or maybe even through their parents. And it's kind of interesting, and I really like to see young people in the audience. The other band I play with is with Jon Spencer, and Jon, with the Blues Explosion, had quite a bit of success and had built up a large audience. And mostly, I would say our audience with Jon is the same audience he had with the Blues Explosion coming back to see him because they're just fans. But I don't notice so many young people, and I think because Quasi never had that kind of popularity, people are still sort of discovering the band. Like, I never even heard of this band. What's the deal? But with Jon, people feel like even though I think the music that we're making now is different and it's a totally new band and could potentially get a new audience, I think people feel like they know what they're going to get because, and that's kind of what they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been listening to a lot of Quasi the last couple weeks in preparation for you coming down here, and the thing that's so interesting to me as a musician and with the knowledge that I have of 50, 60 years of music, I did an episode recently where I talked about chord progressions. And all the songs I listened to of yours from Quasi, the chord progressions do not go where I think they're going to go. They're very refreshing. They're not straight. Like, I can usually anticipate what is going to happen. And with your music, with Quasi, I cannot anticipate it, which was so cool. It's not, I'm not saying that it's bad that I couldn't anticipate it. It was just, it always went in a different direction. And I think you've been playing long enough and you have enough knowledge with standard chord progressions and verse, chorus, verse, and all that kind of stuff. It felt so different to me. You think that's true?
It might be. Because I'm not a trained musician. I do know standard chord progressions because they're standard. I play a lot of stuff on the keyboard, but I just figured out how to play keys myself. I never had lessons. So I'm very limited. Also, I don't really like keyboard music about 95% of the time. So those two things make the keyboard-based stuff maybe different from other keyboard-based stuff. Guitar, I'm more competent on, but I don't even really use it anymore.
So what instruments do you play?
Just the standard rock instruments. Drums I can knock a beat out for fun, but bass guitar and keys I've actually more or less professionally played.
Those are your primary.
Yeah.
But you also play guitar.
A guitar was my original instrument, and that's probably the instrument I'm most competent on.
Okay. And so in Heatmiser, you were playing bass, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And then you ended up playing bass for Elliott on Figure 8, right? On a number of songs?
Yeah, I toured with Elliott. I was in all his touring bands, starting from when he left Heatmiser. He toured solo without a band a lot, too. But when he had a band, I was always playing bass. So I did that for years. And I played on some recordings. Some of the songs were written on tour in the buses and hotels. And we tracked some stuff in studios on tour. So I was around. Elliott was just usually played the instruments himself.
Yeah, from what I've read, a lot of times, I mean, he would just play everything, right?
Usually, yeah. But occasionally he used a drummer, and sometimes, again, these songs, if they had been worked out on tour, then I had been playing the bass, and I just went in the studio and put the bass on.
So were you hanging out with Larry Crane and Jackpot as well?
Well, Larry I've known, my first band in San Francisco played with his band, Vomit Launch. They were out of Chico, California. But they went down to San Francisco to play pretty often, and I knew him since like the mid '80s, before either one of us moved to Portland.
Wow, that was kind of the main place in Portland to record, correct?
Yeah, I don't. Larry had again, because he was a friend of mine. He had before Jackpot, he had a little studio in his basement called Laundry Rules. And one or two of my bands recorded down there. So, Jackpot was a big step up. I don't know if it was the main. There was other studios around, but because I was friends with him, that was the natural place.
Mm-hmm. I went to recording school in 2005. So I have
a lot of tape ops lying around.
Yeah. And I mean, I used to know a lot more about it when I would do it. And I had Pro Tools and a computer and I can record things, but I haven't cleaned a 24-track tape machine in 20 years. But
sure. Yeah.
I learned how to do all of that stuff. But I could tell when I was in school in 2005 that it was on the way out. And I knew if I was going to do it, I would have to be an intern for 5 years before I could get an assistant position. So I kind of it was a bummer because I was in the program and I was like, this is not going to work out.
Yeah. Well, it's a skill that's still useful. But professional recording studio is, if anything, even harder than professional musician.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
I mean, financially.
Yeah, it's so expensive to own a console and a tape machine and all the various mics.
Yeah, a room.
Yeah, just a room. Yeah. Yeah, it was all the stuff that had been recorded was what I wanted to record. And so I missed everything when I went to school. In 2005, it had all happened already. And I kind of realized it halfway through, and so I had to get a different job. But the whole process to me is very fascinating because you're not really a part of the band, but you get to help them figure out how to paint the picture, the sonic picture. And so I always appreciated, as a musician, the opportunity to be able to help people.
Sure. Yeah, that's very important. I mean, one of these, we were talking about side gigs. I've done production. And when I do production, I don't do engineering because that would be my first decision as a producer to have a better engineer than me work on the record. But so I do have experience doing it from that angle, and which is different from producing your own band, which is pretty normal. But to have somebody who can hover above the process and see how the parts are moving.
Yeah, you need an outsider with fresh ears, because if you're the musician who wrote everything, you can't necessarily see it the same way someone else will.
No, I mean, and that can be good or bad. It's just different. My Quasi tends to go even maybe alternating. Let's make this record ourselves. Let's go into a studio and have somebody else help us out this time.
Yeah.
Because there's things there's trade-offs either way.
Yeah, just call it Rick Rubin. Have him sleep on the couch for a while.
Yeah, I don't know.
You heard stories about Rick Rubin?
Not really. I read Hip Hop Family Tree though. You know that comic book? You should check it out.
Is it just him?
No, it's like very extensively researched comic book about the early days of hip hop, and he features into it and towards the end of the early days of hip hop.
Yeah, it's amazing how many things he's had his hand in. But I've heard stories where he's just like, I don't know, he's like a mythical creature. He'll just lay on the couch and listen to some mixes for a while and then be like, yeah, change this thing, move the chorus there, do this, do that, and then it's like a hit. So he's got some special talent, but it doesn't seem apparent just like looking at him or seeing him work. He's kind of like doing things in a magical way. I don't know.
Yeah, that's nice. I haven't, mostly a lot of production is like, it really is like a job, like you're negotiating rates with the studio and hours and organizing this and that, getting equipment. There's a lot of just grunt work. Mm-hmm. Rick Rubin doesn't do that.
No, he doesn't. He's not getting Chinese food. So in the 90s, then you're doing stuff with Heatmiser, you're recording with Quasi, you're touring with Elliott. What was it like when he just went from the guy in the club with you to like, I mean, Gus Van Sant kind of blew it up, right?
Yeah, again, that was a really tumultuous period in my life. Everything was topsy-turvy. So there was a lot of exciting things happening, but I wasn't in a good position to appreciate it, I think, because I was just so nuts. And yeah, again, when you're in the middle of something, but it obviously was a big change. We're playing little clubs, and suddenly we're in bigger clubs, and then we're in these places with chandeliers, and punk rockers are gone, but like sorority girls are all in the front. Like, what's going? I don't know how it happens. Things just happen like that sometimes.
It just kind of runs away, right?
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I'm more comfortable in more of the punk rock model.
Yeah.
But it's okay. It's not about staying in your comfort zone.
Yeah, but I think that is a normal thing if you're just a regular person, you don't know what that's like, and then all of a sudden all this attention gets thrust on you and everybody's talking about you, that can't be good for anybody.
Yeah, well, they weren't talking about me, so I don't know. That wasn't my problem.
Yeah. So it wasn't a positive experience then for you. You're just kind of dealing with your own stuff.
There was positive. Sure, it was positive. I learned a lot. But yeah, I mean, it all worked out. So now I think it's positive. Mm-hmm. Like we were saying when I walked in, I've had just like a mellow summer, and like I've had time to sort of look around and be like, wow, this is pretty neat. I'm still playing music. I have a home. I have my health, and everything worked out. There were a lot of times it didn't seem like that was going to be the case, but it did.
And you still enjoy living in Portland?
Yeah, I do. Like I say, I have a home, which is not just a house. I do live in a house, but it's a place where I feel comfortable. I got a family, and I've been in the same place for, say, over 20 years, 25 years or something like that. So I'm pretty comfortable. Right before I came here, I was painting, the stairway down into the basement, still doing little,
I was painting my garage before I came down here.
Yeah,
We're
exactly.
both painting today.
Yeah. So
Nice.
those are nice things. Like it's nice to have a home that you care about, and like, I'm just going to gussy this up a little bit, give it some fresh paint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was married before, and I had 3 kids, and things didn't work out, and we got divorced, and she stayed in the house, and then I was in a duplex for 3 years, and I just bought a house a year ago. So I've been completely renovating this place for the last year, because the woman that lived there before, they built it in 1968, and she and her, I think it was 6 kids, lived in this house.
Yeah.
And they didn't update anything. There's no garbage disposal. There's no dishwasher.
Well, at least they didn't wreck it, because sometimes people, quote, update, unquote, their house and just screw it up.
Yeah. But there's something really cool about owning a place and being able to say, I'm going to paint that wall pink, or I'm going to knock that wall down, or I'm going to put a new door right here. Like, it's so cool to just own something and be able to just do whatever you want.
Yeah, it's like home. That's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a house.
Do you have a studio space at your house, or you can?
I did, yeah.
Yeah?
I unfortunately, part of this painting thing is the aftermath of major work that we had to do because of black mold problems. We had to have a lot of these walls torn out of our basement, including where my studio was, a little room. So I had to move everything out, and so that we did the mold abatement and the moisture abatement and all this work done. It was a pain in the ass, but that's done, and now I still don't have a studio, but I had the physical space is now available to move back in.
Uh-huh. And so what's next? You gonna record and put something out, or are you gonna continue touring?
Both. I mean, Quasi has a record in the can already to be released at some point pretty soon. I think next year Quasi's going to tour, do some substantial touring. Jon Spencer and the Hitmakers, we put out a record earlier this year, and we did do some touring already, but we took the summer off. But next month start up again. So I'm going to be busy for the, I don't know, basically I had to sit down a couple weeks ago and schedule out my life for approximately a year.
Is that intimidating?
It made me nervous to do it, but it's good. It's strange. That's a little bit of the aftermath of COVID, because tours have to get planned so much farther in advance now. It used to be, in my life, was scheduled out about 6 months ahead of time, but now it's closer to a year. And so, with the 2 bands, that's also a complicating factor.
So for people who have never toured in a band, what are the pros and what are the cons? What are the things you enjoy and what are the things you're like, fuck?
I just, the music's the main thing for me now at this stage. I'm not like career building or anything like that. And if the music is great and the shows are great, then I'm happy, as long as the numbers reach a certain bar and I'm not, it's not going to be a financial disaster. Mm-hmm. But over and above that is great. But the music, regardless of the numbers, if the music's not good, it's just depressing. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
So that's really just the whole thing for me.
But do you ever book Kansas City and you're like, God, I hate Kansas City?
No.
No? I mean, there's got to be cities that are better than others, right?
Yes and no. Sometimes it's surprising. You don't, this last tour with the Hitmakers, well, not the last one, the previous one, I played all kinds of. I didn't understand the tour. I don't book the tours. I'm thankfully I'm terrible at that. But the agent put this tour together, and we were playing Wichita, Colorado Springs, little towns like that I've never been before. And sometimes those are the best shows.
Yeah, because if they're smaller and there's not as many people, the people who are coming to see you really like you, right?
Usually.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really hit or miss. You could have a great show in Brooklyn or not such a good show. And then go to Wichita, great, it might not be good there either.
Yeah.
Crowds, you might say like, why are we playing? There's nobody here in Wichita.
Yeah.
Or like, wow, Wichita, it really showed up. And I don't even remember, after all said and done, which cities had the good shows, which cities had the bad shows, because, I mean, why? It's all just different next time you go.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so you just go and see what happens.
It's a good way to look at it, because it's part of it's out of your control.
A lot of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's why the music is everything, really. That's the one thing. Of course, you're a band. You have bandmates. You can't control every element in the music, but you have a lot more input on the music than you do whether people show up to the club or, things like that.
Mm-hmm. And have you been through Europe, Japan, South Africa? Have you been all around?
We've never played music in Africa, but yeah, Europe many times, Japan numerous times, Australia a couple of times.
How's Australia?
It's far away. It's really far. I like it, but it's difficult to tour there for financial reasons. It's very expensive to get there.
Uh-huh.
And it's sparsely populated relative to Europe, or even the United States. So it's also difficult to make the money. You can't. In Europe, you drive a few hours, play another show, drive a few hours, play another show. And there's only a few cities to play in Australia, and the expenses are so high getting over there. It's a challenge.
Well, and do you tour with a sound system and an engineer, or do you just
no.
just rely on whatever the venue has?
Well, sometimes we bring our own engineer. So it kind of depends on the numbers again, because an engineer is an expense that sometimes just can't be paid for, depending on the type of tour you're doing. Ideally, it's nice, but you always use. I've never taken sound systems. We're always using, venues that have the right sound system.
Okay, so you guys have a writer that you send out to guarantee that you get whatever.
Sure, there's technical writer and and then that gets attached to the one that tells them to buy some pita and hummus and peanut butter.
Yeah, make sure they read it. It was a classic. I can't remember what band it was, but they want to make sure there was the brown M&Ms.
That was Van Halen.
Was it Van Halen? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, sometimes that stuff's really important. I work in that industry, so I understand.
From the touring band's perspective, it can make the difference between like a shit day and a great day. Like if you show up at the club, you've been driving all day, you play late, you crash in the hotel, you get up in the morning, you drive all day, you maybe stop at a gas station and get a snack or something, but you're starved, and then you got to get to work. So if there's food there, you're great, because you can get some quick food and do the work and be in a good mood. If there's not, then you're cranky, you're starving. You got to start moving heavy equipment. You got to do the sound check, and you're bent out of shape because all you wanted was a snack, and that's just too hard for or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's why I think a lot of people think like, oh, these bands, who do they think they are? Like, we're supposed to cater to them. They want salsa with their chips. Like, but it's actually a big, one of the big parts of the day for the band to get in there and have a little bit of food before getting to serious work, because you sometimes have very little time to eat or take care of yourself during the course of the day.
Well, yeah, for sure. And if all you're getting is like a hot dog from 7-Eleven before you go on to play for 2 hours, like, that's not good for you.
No, I mean, and some people will do that anyway, but I mean, I'm the type of person who likes to watch his health a little.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's got to be pretty challenging when you're on the road, right? You can't just make a special dinner for yourself every time.
No, but you figure, I mean, I've been doing this all my life. So
Yeah.
kind of figured it out.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. That's cool.
Not all my life. I did have a childhood.
Well, what led you in your childhood to doing what you do? Did you start playing early?
Well, I mean, I've always loved music, listening to music, but I played trumpet in the school band, like in 4th grade, up until junior high. And by junior high, I was just serious about rock and roll, no trumpet in the rock and roll bands. So I traded it for guitar.
Was there some seminal moment or album or band that you're like, this is what I want to do?
I don't think there was a moment. It was like just a gradual. I always was like, I was just a nerdy, shy, dorky kid who just spent hours listening to the radio from as long as I can remember. And it just morphed, over time.
Yeah, it's cool when you kind of figure out what it is. I mean...
Yeah, I mean, I always knew. That, again, is also lucky from time I was like a young teenager. I just, like, I'm just going to be a rock and roll musician. That's all I'm going to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of people think that, and it doesn't work out. But, for me, I was lucky.
Yeah, I mean, you're creating art and getting paid for it and doing what you want to do. So that's a win-win.
Yeah. I mean, again, the pay it's just necessary to make it work. The numbers got to line up.
Yeah.
I'm not so worried about it. Otherwise, it'd be nice. If you make a little bit more, then that's less of those little side hustles you got to do.
Mm-hmm. But that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. There's a balance, right? You don't want to become Michael Jackson. You don't want to be Mariah Carey. Like that's unmanageable.
Well, yeah, I'm not in imminent danger of that.
You could be. Anything can happen, but that's the thing.
It's true. I have a family, like I say, and I have a home, and because I have that, I think I'm sane and healthy, and I can go out and tour pretty extensively and be fine. Mm-hmm. Before I had that kind of stability in my life, when I was, as I was referring to earlier, I was just like kind of a mess, just like back and forth, up and down, all, good, bad, not just like good and bad, but like fantastic, horrible, like young people are, I guess. But, that's, I value having a home and a place where I can just go after tour and be a human being.
Mm-hmm. Well, in terms of the creative process, how do you typically work? Do you just kind of let things happen, or do you spend a lot of time just playing and then hoping you're going to get divine intervention? Like, how did things work out for you?
Yeah, it changes over time. Nowadays, I've just been doing it for so long, it just kind of happens. I think I've developed a sense of knowing. I get ideas all the time, Most of them are not good, but like some of them I think, all right, I think that's probably a legit piece of music. But you kind of just got to let it happen. The main thing I do is throw out stuff that's not good.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's more or less getting out of the way and letting it happen.
But when you go back and listen to things you've created...
No, I never do that.
You don't?
I try not to.
No?
No.
You put it out and then you're done with it?
Yeah.
Yeah? Because you critique it too much?
I found it detrimental to the creative process.
Okay.
You listen to it 10 billion times, as you know, when you're recording it. And through the process of writing it, rehearsing it, getting it, and then you record it, and then you mix it, and then you're mastering it. And by that time, it's just like, every detail, and I just never want to hear it again. Occasionally, I forget a song. Like, oh, let's play this song from that album. I have to go back and listen to it. And sometimes I'm like, oh, it's pretty good. Other times it's kind of like, I would have done it different. But other than that, if there's no specific reason to listen to it, I don't.
You just kind of let it go. That's pretty cool.
Well, yeah, keep moving.
Yeah. Yeah, I did a show for Tommy Thayer does this thing where he's the guitar. I think he's a guitarist from Kiss.
Yeah, I only know
he's in Kiss. I forget what instruments he plays, but he's like friends with a bunch of the old school rockers and stuff. And he had Robbie Krieger, who plays guitar for the Doors.
Sure.
And then he had Alice Cooper. And my job for the night was putting the lyrics for Alice Cooper on a monitor so that he could read them as they were playing through his songs. Because I don't know if he lost his memory or what, but he doesn't know the lyrics to his songs. And so I had to just put his lyrics up so he could read them. Yeah. So
you got a lot of songs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, think about Dylan, too. How does Dylan remember anything?
I think he forgets a lot, actually.
That's insane,
he might remember
man.
Or maybe not.
Yeah. Some of those songs have like 14 verses, man. There's no way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's an unusual person.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool, man. Well, I think that's a good spot. I appreciate you coming down and talking to me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, that was awesome.